It was a calm Monday morning when the bell rang across Greenfield High School. Students rushed into their classrooms chatting and laughing as they carried their books. The math class was about to start, and for most of them, it wasn't exactly the most exciting part of the day. But today was going to be different. Something unusual was about to happen in that room. Mr. Adams, the math teacher, walked in carrying his usual pile of books. He was known around the school for being strict but fair. He loved teaching, but more than that, he loved challenging his students. Some students liked that about him. Others wished he'd go a little easier. He always said, "Math isn't about numbers. It's about thinking." The students took their seats, still whispering among themselves, but their voices dropped when he put his books down. Mr. Adams stood in front of the class and looked at the faces staring back at him. "Good morning, everyone," he said in his firm voice. "Good morning, sir," the class answered in unison. He gave a small smile and started writing on the blackboard. The sound of chalk scraping filled the room. Students tried to follow along, expecting the usual lesson, maybe equations or geometry like last week. But when he finished writing, everyone froze. On the board was a math problem so long and complicated that even the top students frowned. It was filled with symbols, fractions, and letters that didn't seem to make sense together. Some students exchanged confused looks. Others sighed quietly. Mr. Adams turned around and folded his arms. "This," he said, tapping the board with the chalk, "is what many would call an impossible question." The room fell completely silent. Even the sound of the ceiling fan seemed louder now. He continued, "I came across this problem years ago when I was still in college. Back then, it took me nearly 2 days to solve it. So today I want to see if anyone in this class has the courage to give it a try." A few nervous laughs filled the room. Everyone knew this was one of those challenges that could make or break your confidence. At the front, a boy named Liam whispered to his friend, "No way I'm touching that." "I'd rather get an F." His friend chuckled and shook his head. "Yeah, I'd fail proudly." Mr. Adams smiled faintly, noticing their reaction. "Come on," he said. "Someone must be brave enough to at least try. Who's up for a little challenge?" No one moved. A few students looked down at their notebooks, pretending to be busy. One girl raised her hand halfway but quickly put it down again. The air in the room was thick with hesitation, and then from the back of the class a hand went up. It wasn't raised quickly or proudly. It just lifted quietly and calmly. Every head turned. It was Ethan, the quiet boy who always sat near the window in the last row. He was the kind of student who didn't talk much, didn't draw attention, and rarely joined group conversations. Most of his classmates barely noticed him. He never caused trouble, never volunteered for anything. He just did his work, handed it in, and went home. For a moment, even Mr. Adams seemed surprised. He blinked and said, "Ethan, you want to try?" Ethan nodded, not saying a word. A ripple of laughter spread across the room. Some students thought he was joking. "No way," one of them whispered. "He barely talks. Now he wants to solve that?" Mr. Adams raised his hand to quiet them down. "All right, let's give him a chance," he said, his voice firm but kind. "Ethan, come to the board." Ethan stood up slowly, pushing his chair back without a sound. He looked calm, not nervous, not excited, just calm. He walked to the front with steady steps while everyone watched him as if they were seeing him for the first time. Mr. Adams handed him the chalk. "Take your time," he said softly. Ethan nodded again. He stared at the board for a few seconds, his eyes moving carefully across the equation. It was long and messy, but he didn't seem scared. From the back, someone whispered, "He's gonna freeze." Another student giggled. But their laughter faded quickly as Ethan began to write. He didn't rush. Every mark he made seemed intentional. His hand moved smoothly, as if he already had a plan in mind. The numbers and symbols started to form a pattern. The class grew quiet again, and even the students who were joking earlier leaned forward. Mr. Adams crossed his arms, watching closely. Something about the boy's calmness caught his attention. Ethan wasn't guessing or hesitating. He was solving. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was the chalk tapping the board. Ethan would pause sometimes, look at the problem again, then continue writing. Mr. Adams walked a few steps closer, trying to follow his logic. His expression slowly changed, and from curiosity to mild surprise. The steps Ethan was taking actually made sense. When Ethan finally stopped, half the board was covered in numbers. He stepped back, turned to the teacher and said quietly, "That's the simplified form." The class was still. No one spoke. Mr. Adams stared at the board, then back at Ethan. "How did you—" he started, but stopped himself. He looked at the steps again carefully. The method was correct. The reasoning was solid. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was clear that Ethan had done something none of his classmates could even begin to attempt. "You're on the right track," Mr. Adams finally said, his voice softer now. "Go ahead. Finish it." Ethan nodded once more and picked up the chalk again. He erased a few parts, replaced a few numbers, and wrote the final line. Then he put the chalk down gently and turned around. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then Mr. Adams walked up to the board and looked closely at the final answer. His eyebrows lifted. The room seemed to hold its breath. After what felt like forever, the teacher said quietly, "That's correct," the class gasped. A few students clapped softly at first, then others joined in. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but there was real surprise in the air. No one had expected this from Ethan, the quiet boy at the back who rarely spoke. Mr. Adams smiled, a little shaken himself. "Ethan," he said, "can you tell us how you figured it out?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at the board as if replaying his own steps. "I just broke it down," he said finally, his voice calm but sincere. "It looked complicated, but when you separate it into parts, it becomes easier to see what connects." Mr. Adams nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "You're absolutely right. Most people give up when something looks too complex, but you didn't." Ethan gave a small smile and walked back to his seat. The class was still watching him, whispering to each other in disbelief. Some of them looked at him differently now, with respect instead of amusement. As he sat down, Mr. Adams turned to the class. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "Never assume something's impossible just because it looks difficult. And never underestimate someone just because they stay quiet." The rest of the class went by in a blur. Mr. Adams continued teaching, but his mind kept drifting back to that moment. He had been teaching for over 15 years, and in all that time, he had rarely been that surprised. When the bell rang and students started packing up, Mr. Adams called out, "Ethan, can I see you for a moment?" Ethan walked up to his desk. "Yes, sir?" Mr. Adams smiled warmly. "You've got quite a gift," he said. "Do you study math outside of school?" Ethan nodded. "Sometimes. I watch videos and read online. I just like figuring things out." "That's good," Mr. Adams said thoughtfully. "Keep doing that. And if you ever want extra problems to work on, come see me after class. I'll give you something interesting." Ethan nodded again, a small spark of pride in his eyes. "Thank you, sir." As he left the room, Mr. Adams watched him go. He realized that sometimes the most extraordinary students are the ones who never try to stand out. They just quietly keep learning until one day their brilliance speaks for itself. That day, Mr. Adams learned something just as valuable as his students did, that real talent doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment to be noticed, and for Ethan that moment had finally arrived. The next day at Greenfield High felt a little different. Word about what had happened in Mr. Adams' math class had spread faster than anyone expected. By the time Ethan walked through the school gates, whispers were already circling through the hallways. "Hey, that's the kid who solved the impossible question," someone said quietly as he passed. "No way. That quiet guy from the back?" another replied. Ethan could hear bits and pieces of conversations but didn't react. He wasn't used to attention. Usually he'd walk into class without anyone even noticing. But now heads turned when he entered. Some students smiled. Others just stared, curious. Inside the classroom, the atmosphere was still buzzing with leftover excitement from the day before. Mr. Adams was already there, standing by the board, flipping through some papers. When he saw Ethan, he gave him a small nod. Not the kind a teacher gives every morning, but one that said, "I'm proud of you." "Good morning, class," Mr. Adams began once everyone had settled down. "Before we start today's lesson, I want to talk about something important." The students exchanged looks, guessing what it might be about. He turned toward the board and said, "Yesterday we witnessed something special. Ethan solved a problem that most people wouldn't even attempt. It reminded me of something I often forget, that every student learns differently. Some quietly, some loudly, but each in their own way." A few students nodded. Others looked at Ethan, who sat quietly, his eyes on his notebook. Mr. Adams smiled. Now, that doesn't mean we all have to be math geniuses. What matters is that we try, that we think beyond what seems possible. That's how we grow. The class clapped politely, but it wasn't forced. They meant it. Even those who used to think math was boring were now listening differently. After that little talk, Mr. Adams moved on to the new topic. Equations filled the board again, but this time, more hands went up when he asked questions. The class seemed a bit more alive, as if everyone wanted to prove they could think too. Ethan, though, stayed quiet, answering only when asked directly. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to learn. During lunch break, he sat alone under a tree near the courtyard, his usual spot. He opened a small notebook filled with scribbles, equations, and tiny notes. His private collection of problems he liked solving in his free time. He was working on something new when a shadow fell over his notebook. He looked up. It was Liam, the same boy who had laughed the day before when Ethan volunteered. "Hey," Liam said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan nodded slightly. Liam sat down, glancing at the notebook. "You really surprised everyone yesterday," he said. "I mean, I didn't think anyone could solve that." Ethan shrugged. "I just like figuring things out." Liam smiled. "Yeah, but still, that was crazy. I tried looking at the problem last night. I couldn't even start." There was a short silence before Liam added, "Do you think you could help me understand it sometime?" Ethan blinked, surprised. No one had ever asked him that before. "Sure," he said after a moment. "It's not as hard once you see the pattern." Liam grinned. "Cool. Thanks, man." That small moment marked the start of something new. Over the next few days, more students began talking to Ethan. Not out of curiosity anymore, but genuine respect. Some asked for help with homework. Others just wanted to sit near him during class. Ethan didn't say much, but he helped anyone who asked. He explained things slowly, simply, in ways that even students who hated math could understand. It wasn't just what he knew, it was how patient he was. Mr. Adams watched all this from the front of the room with quiet pride. He saw how the atmosphere in his class was changing, how one student's courage had made everyone else believe they could try harder too. But there was something else on his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's approach to that impossible question. The logic, the clarity. It wasn't something you usually saw in high school students. It was the kind of understanding that came from deep, self-driven learning. So after class one day, he called Ethan to his desk again. "I've been thinking," Mr. Adams said. "You seem to have a natural gift for mathematics. Have you ever thought about joining competitions?" Ethan hesitated. "Competitions?" "Yes," Mr. Adams replied. "There's a regional math challenge coming up next month. It's tough, but I think you could do really well." Ethan looked unsure. "I don't know, sir. I've never done something like that." Mr. Adams smiled. "That's exactly why you should. Sometimes, the best way to learn more about yourself is to step outside your comfort zone. You've got something special, Ethan. Don't hide it." Ethan didn't say anything right away. He just nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That evening, at home, he couldn't stop thinking about it. His house was small and quiet. His mother worked late shifts at a local store, so he often spent his evenings alone. He sat by the window with his notebook open, looking at the pages filled with his handwriting. Joining a competition sounded scary. He didn't like being the center of attention, but something inside him whispered that maybe it was time to try. He thought about how people had looked at him after that class, not laughing, not ignoring, but listening. For the first time, he felt seen. The next morning, he found Mr. Adams before class started. "Sir," he said softly, "I'll do it. I'll try for the competition." Mr. Adams smiled widely. "That's great to hear. We'll start preparing right after school today." And so they did. Each afternoon, when the halls emptied and the sunlight began to fade through the windows, Ethan stayed behind. Mr. Adams gave him practice problems, sometimes far more difficult than anything taught in class. At first, Ethan struggled. There were times he couldn't find the right path, times he got stuck for hours. But he never gave up. Mr. Adams noticed how determined he was. He'd often stay quietly at his desk, pretending to grade papers while secretly watching Ethan work through the puzzles with full focus. It was rare, that kind of patience and passion in someone so young. One evening, after another long session, Mr. Adams said, "You remind me of myself when I was your age. The difference is I never had someone to guide me. You, Ethan, have the chance to go further than you think. Ethan smiled shyly. Thank you, sir. I'll do my best. By the end of the week, even other teachers had started hearing about Ethan. Some dropped by the math room to meet him, curious to see the boy who had left Mr. Adams speechless. They found not a loud, overconfident student, but a quiet, polite boy with steady eyes and a mind that never stopped questioning. And yet Ethan didn't change much. He still sat at the back of the class, still avoided the spotlight. But something deep inside him had shifted, a kind of quiet confidence that made him walk a little taller. The day before the regional competition, Mr. Adams handed him a small folded paper. This was the first question I couldn't solve when I was your age, he said with a grin. Try it tonight. Don't worry about getting it right. Just think about it. Ethan took the paper and nodded. That night, he sat at his desk for hours working through it line by line. It wasn't easy. He had to stop, think, and start over several times. But he didn't quit. When he finally found the answer, it was long past midnight. He smiled to himself. Not because he solved it, but because it reminded him why he loved learning. It wasn't about winning or being praised. It was about the feeling of discovery, that small spark that lights up your mind when something finally makes sense. As he closed his notebook and turned off his lamp, he felt ready. Whatever happened the next day, he knew he was no longer the invisible boy in the back of the class. He was someone who believed in himself now, and that changed everything. The day of the regional math competition finally arrived. The morning air outside Greenfield High was crisp and cool, filled with a quiet tension that seemed to hang over everything. For most students, it was just another school day. But for Ethan, it felt like something much bigger. He stood in front of the school gates holding his worn-out backpack, glancing up at the sky. The sun was just rising, turning the clouds gold. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the small tremor in his hands. Inside that bag was his notebook, a pencil case, and the folded paper Mr. Adams had given him days ago, the one with that tough old problem he had solved just before midnight. He remembered the feeling he'd had that night, the mix of calm and excitement when everything suddenly made sense. He told himself to hold on to that feeling now. Ethan, a voice called out behind him. He turned around to see Mr. Adams walking toward him, carrying a folder and his usual confident smile. Morning, the teacher said. You ready for this? Ethan nodded. A little nervous, Mr. Adams chuckled. That's good. It means you care. Just remember, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about learning how far you can go when you trust yourself. They took the bus together to the competition hall, a large auditorium in the next town, filled with students from different schools. Some wore school blazers with embroidered logos. Others carried stacks of papers and fancy calculators. Everyone looked serious, focused. As they entered, Mr. Adams leaned down and said quietly, You belong here. Ethan, don't doubt that for a second. Ethan smiled faintly and nodded. Inside, the organizers directed the students to their seats. Rows of desks filled the hall, each with a number card and a test sheet face down. The sound of shuffling papers and footsteps echoed softly. Ethan found his seat, row 3, desk 12. He sat down, placed his pencils neatly and glanced around. Some students were whispering to each other, while others stared straight ahead, already lost in thought. A voice from the front called out through a microphone. Good morning, participants. Welcome to the Regional Mathematics Challenge. You have 2 hours to complete your test. Remember, no calculators, no outside help, and no talking. You may begin. The sound of flipping papers filled the hall. Ethan turned his sheet over. His eyes scanned the questions. They were tough, more complicated than anything he had seen in school. But something inside him lit up. This was the kind of challenge he loved. He took a deep breath and began. Minutes turned into an hour. His pencil moved quickly but carefully. Every now and then he'd pause, stare at the question, close his eyes, and think. The noise of scribbling around him faded. All he could hear was his own breathing and the scratch of his pencil. He didn't notice how much time had passed until a voice said, 30 minutes left. He was on the last question now, one that looked impossible at first glance. A long equation filled with symbols he hadn't seen before. He felt his heartbeat quicken, but then he remembered something Mr. Adams once said. Every big problem is just a small one hiding inside. He looked at the question again, breaking it down piece by piece. Slowly, it began to make sense. His pencil moved faster, his mind clear and focused, when the final call came at "Time's up." He put his pencil down, took a deep breath, and leaned back in his chair. His hands were tired, but he felt calm. As they collected the papers, Ethan glanced around. Some students looked frustrated, others confident. He didn't know where he stood among them, and honestly, he didn't care that much. What mattered was that he had given his best. When he stepped out of the hall, Mr. Adams was waiting near the entrance. "How did it go?" he asked eagerly. Ethan shrugged, smiling a little. "I think it went okay." Mr. Adams nodded proudly. "That's all I wanted to hear." They grabbed lunch nearby, sandwiches and orange juice from a small cafe across the street. Mr. Adams kept the conversation light, asking about Ethan's interests outside math. "I like reading about space," Ethan said between bites. "And I like puzzles. Anything that makes me think," Mr. Adams smiled. "That curiosity will take you far, Ethan. Never lose it." A week later, the results came in. It was a sunny afternoon when Mr. Adams received an email from the competition board. He read it once, blinked, then read it again. His mouth slowly curved into a wide smile. That same afternoon, he walked into class holding a printed paper. "Before we start," he said, his voice full of excitement, "I have an announcement to make." The students looked up from their notebooks. Mr. Adams paused for a moment, building suspense. "You all remember the regional math challenge Ethan participated in last week?" There were nods and murmurs. "Well," he said, grinning now, "the results just came in, and I'm proud to tell you that Ethan not only placed first in our district, he ranked in the top 3 in the entire region." The class erupted into cheers. Some clapped, some whistled, and others just looked stunned. Ethan froze for a second, his face turning red. He hadn't expected that. He looked at Mr. Adams, who nodded with a proud, fatherly expression. "Well done," the teacher said softly. After class, students crowded around Ethan, not to make fun of him this time, but to congratulate him. Even those who barely talked to him before were now smiling, shaking his hand and asking how he'd done it. Liam came over and patted him on the shoulder. "I told you, man, you're a genius." Ethan laughed lightly. "I'm not. I just like figuring things out." That day, the school principal called him into the office. The principal, an older woman with kind eyes, shook his hand warmly. "You've made the school proud, Ethan," she said. "We're going to feature your story in the school newsletter. Keep up the good work." Ethan smiled shyly. "Thank you, ma'am." After school, when the building was quiet again, Ethan stayed behind in the classroom to help Mr. Adams put away some papers. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, filling the room with a soft golden glow. Mr. Adams looked at him and said, "You know, Ethan, when you solved that problem weeks ago, I was impressed, but this shows what happens when talent meets hard work." Ethan lowered his gaze. "I didn't think I could actually win." Mr. Adams smiled gently. "That's what makes it even better. The best moments in life are the ones that surprise us, the ones we never see coming." They stood in silence for a moment. Then the teacher said, "I want to tell you something. You might not realize it, but you've changed the way this class sees learning. Before, most of them thought math was something only smart people could do. But now they're trying harder. You showed them that it's not about being born gifted. It's about not giving up." Ethan's lips curved into a small smile. "I'm glad, sir." That night at home, Ethan placed his certificate on his small desk beside his notebook. He stared at it for a while, not out of pride, but disbelief. A few months ago, no one even noticed him. Now his teacher and classmates believed in him. He sat down and opened his notebook again. On the first blank page, he wrote at the top, "Every problem has an answer, and if you don't stop looking for it." Then he smiled to himself and started working on a new problem. Meanwhile, across town, Mr. Adams sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee and thinking about the last few weeks. He had seen hundreds of students in his career, but there was something special about Ethan. Not just his intelligence, but his humility, his patience, and his quiet strength. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Adams felt truly inspired, not as a teacher, but as a person. He realized that sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from books or theories, but from the people we least expect, like a quiet boy who reminded everyone that brilliance doesn't need to shout. And as the evening sky turned dark, both teacher and student in their own small corners of the world were thinking the same thing, that the impossible question was never really about math. It was about believing that nothing is truly impossible once you decide to try. The weeks after the regional competition passed quickly. Life at Greenfield High slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but for Ethan, nothing felt quite the same. Even though classes were normal and students returned to their regular routines, he carried a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. Every day he still sat at the back of the classroom, but this time students noticed him differently. Some would pause before speaking, thinking twice about underestimating him. Others came over to ask for help with homework, and he always took the time to explain things patiently. He wasn't loud, he didn't boast, but people listened when he spoke. Mr. Adams observed it all, smiling quietly to himself. He had always known Ethan was special, but seeing him grow and influence the classroom in such a gentle way filled the teacher with pride. Ethan had changed more than just his own life. He had changed the atmosphere of the room, the way his classmates viewed learning, and the way they treated each other. One morning, as the first autumn leaves began to fall outside, Mr. Adams asked the class to solve a particularly challenging problem. The students murmured nervously. It was tougher than usual. As they began working, he noticed something he hadn't expected. Several hands went up immediately. Students were volunteering solutions, discussing ideas, and helping one another. Ethan, of course, stayed quiet, working diligently on his own. But when a student struggled and raised her hand, he was the first to offer guidance, calmly explaining the steps until she understood. It wasn't about showing off. It was about helping others see that they could do more than they believed. That afternoon, after class, Ethan stayed behind as usual. Mr. Adams had left a small stack of practice problems on his desk, ones that would challenge even the best students in the country. "You've come a long way," Mr. Adams said as Ethan picked up the papers. "Do you know why I'm giving these to you?" Ethan shook his head. "Because I like problems?" Mr. Adams chuckled. "That too, but mainly because you've shown that talent isn't enough. It's persistence, curiosity, and kindness that makes someone truly remarkable. You're not just good at math. You're becoming someone people can rely on." Ethan looked at the papers, then at Mr. Adams. "I'll try my best, sir," he said softly. "Good," Mr. Adams replied. "And remember, these problems might seem impossible at first, just like before. But the moment you don't give up, the impossible starts to feel possible." That evening, Ethan sat at his desk at home, the golden light of the sunset spilling through his window. His certificate from the competition leaned against his notebook, a small reminder of what he had accomplished. But unlike before, he didn't feel prideful. Instead, he felt motivated. The recognition was nice, but what mattered most was the journey, the hours of thinking, the moments of frustration, the sudden flashes of understanding that made him feel alive. Over the next few months, things continued to change. Teachers from other subjects began noticing Ethan's abilities. His science teacher asked him to help with a particularly difficult experiment in physics. His English teacher, intrigued by his clear thought process, asked him to write explanations for complex concepts in essays. Even the school librarian invited him to suggest new books for the advanced reading section. Ethan handled it all quietly, never drawing attention to himself. But students began seeking him out, not just for help, but for guidance, advice, and sometimes just to talk. His calm demeanor and thoughtful approach made people feel at ease. He had become more than a talented student. He had become a quietly respected presence in the school. One afternoon, Mr. Adams found Ethan sitting under the tree in the courtyard, the same spot he often used during lunch. The boy was scribbling in his notebook, deep in thought. "Mind if I join you?" Mr. Adams asked. Ethan looked up and smiled slightly. "Of course, sir." They sat together in comfortable silence for a few moments. Finally, Mr. Adams said, "You know, Ethan, I've been thinking, not many people get a chance to truly surprise themselves. But you've done it, not once, but twice. First in my class and then at the competition." Ethan shrugged. "I just like figuring things out. I guess it makes sense when I finally see it." Mr. Adams nodded. "Yes, but it's more than that. What you've done is remind everyone that even the quietest person can do extraordinary things. That's a powerful lesson, and one that goes beyond math." Ethan thought about it. He had never liked attention. He didn't want people to look at him and think he was special. He just wanted to do what he loved. But now, seeing how his quiet actions had inspired others, he realized that maybe helping others see their potential was just as satisfying as solving a problem. In the weeks that followed, Ethan was invited to speak at a small school assembly. His parents attended, proud but nervous, unsure of how their reserved son would handle the stage. When Ethan stepped up to the microphone, the room went silent. He didn't clear his throat or fidget. Instead, he spoke calmly with a steady voice that seemed far older than his years. "I don't consider myself extraordinary," he began. "I just like to think. I like to solve problems. And I like to understand things that don't make sense at first. But I've learned something important. That it's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about never giving up, about helping others, and about believing in yourself even when it seems impossible." The students listened, captivated. Some nodded, some smiled, and others quietly took in the lesson. Ethan's words weren't flashy, but they carried weight because they came from someone who had lived them. After the assembly, students crowded around him to shake his hand, ask questions, and say thank you. For the first time, Ethan felt a new kind of connection, one that wasn't forced or awkward. People respected him, not because he had bragged or shown off, but because he had quietly proven himself and inspired them along the way. That evening, at home, Ethan placed the microphone back in its box and sat at his desk. He opened his notebook and began writing new problems. He didn't do it for awards, recognition, or praise. He did it because he loved the process, the challenge, the thinking, the quiet satisfaction of understanding something complex. Weeks later, Mr. Adams approached him with a small envelope. "The state-level math competition is coming up," he said. "I've nominated you to participate. I think you're ready." Ethan looked at the envelope. A mix of excitement and nervousness washed over him. I'll do it," he said finally. Mr. Adams smiled. "Good. Remember, this isn't just about winning. It's about testing your limits, learning, and showing yourself what you can do." Ethan nodded. That night, he wrote a note at the top of his notebook. Every problem has an answer. Sometimes it takes courage to find it, and so, life went on. Ethan continued learning, growing, and quietly inspiring those around him. The quiet boy in the back of the class was no longer invisible. He had shown that true brilliance often doesn't shout. It waits patiently, observes, and when the time is right, it shines in a way that changes everything around it. For Mr. Adams, for his classmates, and for Ethan himself, the impossible question had become more than just a math problem. It had become a lesson in patience, courage, and self-belief. It had shown that even the smallest, quietest effort could ripple outward and leave a lasting impact. Ethan would continue to solve problems, face challenges, and take risks, but he never forgot that first moment at the blackboard, the moment that had started it all. A teacher's quiet challenge, a classroom full of doubt, and one boy who refused to let fear decide his limits. And that was the real victory, and not the certificates, not the awards, not even the recognition. The victory was in believing, in trying, and in showing others that even the impossible can become possible when someone dares to take the first step. Months had passed since Ethan's win at the regional competition. The seasons changed, and Greenfield High School settled into its usual rhythm. Yet for Ethan, nothing felt ordinary anymore. He was no longer just the quiet boy at the back of the classroom. He had become someone his peers looked up to, a symbol of perseverance and quiet brilliance. Ethan's morning started the same way. A simple breakfast, a careful packing of his notebooks, pencils, and a few reference books he liked to carry. But now, walking through the school halls, he noticed something new. Students greeted him politely. Some even asked for advice, and he began to recognize faces he had never spoken to before. There was a newfound respect, not loud or forced, but real and earned. One day, as he entered the classroom for his morning math lesson, he noticed a small group of students huddled in the corner. They were whispering, glancing his way nervously. For a moment, Ethan wondered if something was wrong. "Ethan," one of them finally said, stepping forward, "could you help us with this problem? We've been stuck on it for hours." Ethan glanced at the papers they held. It was a difficult equation, one that required thinking beyond the regular class material. But he didn't hesitate. "Sure," he said, and took a seat beside them. For the next 20 minutes, he guided them step by step, showing them how to break the problem into smaller parts and see the connections they had missed. Slowly, their faces lit up with understanding. One by one, they solved it, their excitement growing with each correct step. "That's amazing," one of them said, smiling widely. "I never thought we could figure it out." Ethan simply shrugged. "It's just about seeing the pattern. Once you do, it's not impossible anymore." That afternoon, Mr. Adams watched from his desk. He had always known Ethan was special, but watching him help other students quietly and patiently filled the teacher with pride. Ethan's influence was spreading. The quiet boy had become a catalyst, not by showing off, but by inspiring others to believe in themselves. The weeks continued with small but meaningful moments. Students began approaching Ethan for tutoring, and he never refused. He didn't seek recognition. The satisfaction came from seeing others succeed. Even teachers noticed the change in the classroom. There was more collaboration, more curiosity, and more willingness to attempt challenges that once seemed impossible. Then came the invitation that would take Ethan to the next level, a national mathematics competition. It was a huge opportunity, with participants from across the country. Mr. Adams handed him the letter one afternoon. "I think you're ready," he said quietly. "This is your chance to see how far you can go." Ethan stared at the paper. His mind raced. The thought of competing on a national stage was intimidating. Thousands of students, some older, more experienced, it was a big step. But as he thought back to that first, impossible question in Mr. Adams's class, he realized something important. Fear didn't mean you shouldn't try. Courage wasn't about not being scared. It was about moving forward despite the fear. "I'll do it," he said after a long pause. The preparation for the national competition became a new routine. Ethan stayed after school almost every day, working with Mr. Adams on advanced problems. He faced challenges that tested his patience, focus, and creativity. There were moments of frustration when solutions seemed out of reach, but he learned to pause, think differently, and try again. During one of these sessions, Mr. Adams looked at him and said, "Ethan, the real test isn't just in the answers you write. It's in how you approach the problem, how you handle uncertainty, and how you keep going when others might give up." Ethan nodded, absorbing the lesson. Over time, he began to see challenges not as obstacles but as opportunities, puzzles waiting to be solved, each step revealing more about the world and himself. The day of the national competition arrived with a mix of excitement and tension. Ethan's parents drove him to the venue, a large auditorium buzzing with nervous students and teachers. The room was filled with calculators, notebooks, and the faint hum of anticipation. When the test began, Ethan focused like never before. The problems were more complex than anything he had faced before, but his mind was calm. He worked steadily, breaking down equations, analyzing patterns, and writing with precision. For the first time, he wasn't just solving problems for himself. He felt the weight of representing his school, his teachers' guidance, and all the support he had received along the way. Hours later, the test ended. Ethan left the auditorium, tired but satisfied. He knew he had done his best, and that was what mattered most. Mr. Adams met him outside with a proud smile. "No matter what happens," he said, "you've already accomplished more than most people realize." A few weeks later, the results arrived. Ethan had placed among the top 5 students in the country. The achievement was remarkable, but what mattered even more was how he carried himself afterward. He didn't boast. He didn't seek attention. Instead, he continued to work quietly, help others, and remain humble. Back at Greenfield High, the students and teachers celebrated his achievement. But the story that inspired them most wasn't just about winning. It was about a quiet boy who solved an impossible question, who faced fear and uncertainty, and who helped others see their own potential along the way. Ethan's story spread beyond the school. Local newspapers featured him, and the district invited him to speak at educational events. Yet he remained the same thoughtful, humble boy. He never forgot the first day Mr. Adams challenged the class, the way he had felt staring at that impossible equation, and the quiet determination that had sparked his journey. One afternoon, sitting under the same tree in the courtyard, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the students he had helped, the competitions he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. Most of all, he realized that true success wasn't measured by awards or recognition. It was measured by growth, curiosity, perseverance, and the positive impact one had on others. Mr. Adams walked by, noticing Ethan deep in thought. He sat beside him quietly without interrupting. After a few moments, he said, "You know, Ethan, the classroom will never be the same because of you. You've shown everyone that quiet strength can move mountains." Ethan smiled softly. "I just wanted to understand, sir. I didn't mean to change anything." Mr. Adams shook his head. "That's the beauty of it. Sometimes we don't realize the effect we have on the world. Just by being yourself, you've inspired countless others to try, to learn, and to believe." From that day on, Ethan's life continued to unfold in remarkable ways. He kept studying, exploring, and solving problems, but he also focused on mentoring younger students, encouraging curiosity, and helping others find their confidence. The quiet boy who once sat at the back of the classroom had become a guide, a mentor, and a symbol of quiet brilliance. Years later, when he looked back on his journey, he didn't remember the awards or certificates as much as he remembered the moments of discovery. The first time he solved the impossible question, the late nights of thinking and rewriting, the smiles on the faces of students who finally understood a difficult concept. Those were the moments that truly defined him. And in the end, Ethan understood a simple truth. Life is full of impossible questions, moments that seem too complex or too difficult to face. But with patience, courage, and a willingness to try, even the most challenging problems can be solved. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from recognition or fame, but from the quiet understanding that you did your best, inspired others along the way, and never gave up. Ethan's story became more than a tale of a student solving a tough math problem. It became a story about belief, perseverance, and the power of quiet strength. A story that reminded everyone that brilliance often hides where no one expects it, waiting patiently for the right moment to shine. And as Ethan sat once more under the tree in the courtyard, notebook in hand, he smiled quietly. He knew that no matter where life took him, the impossible was never truly impossible, as long as he dared to take the first step, and as long as he never stopped believing in himself. Years had passed since Ethan first solved that impossible question in Mr. Adams's classroom. Greenfield High had changed too. Some teachers had retired, new students had arrived, and the hallways had filled with faces Ethan didn't recognize. Yet for those who had been there when his story began, he remained a legend, a quiet inspiration that everyone talked about. Ethan had grown taller, older, and wiser, but his core hadn't changed. He was still the boy who loved puzzles, problems, and figuring things out. The difference now was that his curiosity had expanded beyond the classroom. He had begun exploring other fields, physics, astronomy, even computer science, and every challenge he encountered was just another puzzle waiting to be solved. One autumn afternoon, he returned to Greenfield High. The school was hosting an event for students with extraordinary talents, and Ethan had been invited to speak about his journey. Walking through the familiar hallways, memories came rushing back. The nervousness he had felt facing that impossible question, the cheers of his classmates when he succeeded, the guidance of Mr. Adams, who had quietly believed in him all along. In the auditorium, students and teachers filled every seat. Posters lined the walls showcasing achievements in science, art, music, and sports. But Ethan could see the curiosity in the eyes of the students, some familiar faces, some new. They weren't just here to hear about awards. They wanted to know the story behind them. When his turn came, Ethan stepped onto the stage. The microphone felt warm in his hands, and he took a deep breath. He looked out at the crowd and began. "I wasn't always someone people noticed. In fact, I spent most of my early school years quietly in the back, trying to understand things that seemed impossible. One day, a teacher gave me a problem that everyone else ignored. It was complex, confusing, and intimidating. I solved it, not because I was the smartest, but because I didn't give up." He paused, letting the words sink in. Some students nodded, others leaned forward, captivated. "That moment changed everything for me," he continued. "It showed me that what seems impossible is just a problem waiting to be understood. It taught me patience, persistence, and the importance of believing in yourself. Most importantly, it taught me that helping others understand something can be as rewarding as solving the problem yourself." After his speech, the auditorium erupted with applause. Students came forward, eager to ask questions, seek advice, and share their own challenges. Some asked how they could prepare for competitions. Others asked how to stay motivated when problems seemed too difficult. Ethan answered each question with patience, humility, and a quiet wisdom that inspired confidence. That evening, as he walked through the empty halls of Greenfield High, Mr. Adams approached him. Now older, with a few streaks of gray in his hair, he still carried the same warmth and pride in his eyes. "You've grown into something remarkable, Ethan," he said quietly. "Not just as a student, but as a person. You've shown generations of students that quiet dedication and curiosity can move mountains." Ethan smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, sir. You gave me the first chance." Mr. Adams shook his head. "No, Ethan, you gave yourself the chance. I only gave you the opportunity to see it. You did the rest." Over the next few years, Ethan's story continued to inspire others beyond Greenfield High. Local schools invited him to speak, universities offered him mentorship programs, and students sought his guidance in competitions, projects, and personal growth. Every time he shared his journey, he reminded listeners that brilliance doesn't always shout. Sometimes it grows quietly, patiently, and only becomes visible when the moment is right. One day, a young student approached him after a talk at a nearby school. She was shy, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. "I'm not very good at math," she admitted softly. "I've never solved anything hard on my own." Ethan knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "That's okay," he said gently. "Being good isn't about talent at first. It's about curiosity and patience. Start small. Ask questions. Break problems into smaller pieces. The rest will come if you keep trying." Her eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Ethan replied with a small smile. "I was once just like you, and if I could do it, so can you." That evening, Ethan sat at his desk reflecting on the long journey he had traveled. From the quiet boy in the back of the classroom to a mentor and role model for so many, he had learned lessons that went far beyond numbers and equations. He had learned that success wasn't just about winning awards, but about inspiring others, being patient, and believing in the unseen potential of every person, including himself. He thought back to the first time Mr. Adams had written that impossible problem on the blackboard. The tension, the fear, and the quiet determination he had felt were still vivid in his mind. That single moment had been the turning point, the spark that ignited a journey of discovery, learning, and self-belief. Now, years later, Ethan realized that the true power of that moment wasn't in the solution he had written on the board, but in the ripple effect it had created. It had inspired classmates, changed a classroom, motivated teachers, and eventually reached students across towns and cities. One quiet afternoon, he returned to the courtyard of Greenfield High, the same spot where he had often sat alone working through problems. The tree had grown taller, its branches stretching wide, but the feeling of peace remained the same. He opened his notebook and began to write, not a solution to a problem this time, but a message for the students who would come after him. The impossible is never truly impossible. It is simply a challenge waiting for your courage, curiosity, and patience. Don't be afraid to try, and never stop believing in yourself. Even quiet effort can create a wave of change far bigger than you imagine. As he closed the notebook, Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction. Life had given him more than he could have imagined. Challenges, victories, and the opportunity to touch the lives of others. And yet the journey was far from over. He knew there would be more problems to solve, more students to guide, and more moments of uncertainty to face. But he also knew the truth he had carried from the very beginning, that persistence, curiosity, and quiet determination could turn the impossible into the possible. Ethan stood under the tree, looking at the sun dipping behind the hills. The leaves swayed gently in the wind, whispering as if they were carrying the countless stories of students who had been inspired by him. And for the first time he felt a deep sense of peace, not because of recognition or awards, but because he had learned the true meaning of impact, growth, and quiet brilliance. The story of the quiet boy who once solved the impossible question would live on, not just in textbooks or newsletters, but in the hearts of everyone who learned to believe in themselves because of him. And as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ethan walked away from the courtyard with a steady stride. He carried not only his own dreams, but also the spark of possibility he had lit in countless others. For him, the journey would never truly end, because the impossible would always be there, waiting for someone brave enough to try, patient enough to understand, and determined enough to succeed. And somewhere in the quiet corners of classrooms across the country, students would look at a problem they thought was impossible, remember Ethan's story, and quietly begin to try.